When you think of sovereignty, what do you imagine? Do we picture it as God standing before a vast soulless machine which only he operates, pulling levers and flipping toggles in whatever order he wants, while each gear underneath turns in lifeless obligation? Is that sovereignty? Is the universe simply a great bin of lifeless Legos that God alone is constructing, posing, and adjusting with no other input? He's just doing stuff whether we like it or not. That is a view of sovereignty that is held by many faithful Christians. It is one option. It is commonly known as divine determinism or meticulous providence. The issue with this view of sovereignty is that it leads invariably to God being the cause of suffering in the world. And if you follow this to its logical conclusion, God must be the cause of sin in the world. Even the sin and suffering that we have to admit leads to no lesson being learned or eventual Joseph-esque scene in the end. And it also conflicts with some very straightforward teachings in Scripture, like God does not tempt anyone, yet we are tempted, right? Then on the polar opposite of the spectrum of Christian theology, you have what is called open theism. In this case, there are believers who if you boil down this view, the idea is that God is not actually totally sovereign. In fact, he doesn't even really know for sure what's going to happen in the future. He's just super powerful and he's reacting to things. Proponents of this view will say things like God is experimenting and taking risks with our lives. And all I can say to that is, yikes. I don't want to be experimented on. There is another perspective called relational sovereignty, where God's will is settled in terms of the intention of his character and his overall plan for this world. But meanwhile, he personally, actually relates to us as individuals and invites us to individually, truly interact and cooperate with him, not as pawns, but as partners. What does this mean? Well, it means then that your life is not just a toggle God is switching, but he allows you to make an impact on his heart and his activity. You can please him. You can grieve him. You can anger him. You can hasten his coming. You can delay his stated intentions and leadings in your life. All of these things are said and exampled in both testaments of the Bible. But that means there is flex in the providence and sovereignty of God, demonstrated most clearly and most obviously when Mordecai says to Esther, God has raised you up for this moment, but if you don't, deliverance will arise from somewhere else and you'll die, right? And you're just like, how does that work? And then in the New Testament, they said, what about Elijah? And what did Jesus say? He said, John the Baptist could have been Elijah, but you weren't willing, so now he's not. And you're like, whoa, what is that about? Well, the Bible indicates that there is flex in God's working out of his providential plan. Again, illustrated by the children of Israel in the wilderness. Let's go into the land. We don't want to. Okay, we'll wait 40 years. I guess Jesus will arrive 40 years later. Thanks, you guys, right? And now all of the suffering and all of the difficulty and all of the sorrow, all of those things that happened in those 40 years, okay, that's on you guys. Because you would not do what God wanted you to do, and he allowed you to do that by freeing their wills to have a true choice in the situation. Does that mean that things can happen in our universe that God isn't aware of or happen outside of his authority? No, he is sovereign over all the universe. But as we like to say, he is sovereign over his sovereignty. And as king, he has freed the wills of human beings, and humans now make a difference as we interact with him. As God reigns, he invites us to live in this hevel world as active partners in his grace. And because he says, hey, I want you to partner with me with what I'm doing in this world. Okay, well now we, on some levels, not every level, but on some levels, are now subject to the futility of this world, just as Jesus Christ himself was subject to it in his incarnation. Though time, death, and chance often work against us, and though this fallen, failing, soon-to-be dissolved world actively tries to trap us and hinder us, none of it can succeed in separating us from the love of God in this real relationship we have with him. One author put it this way: as a relational God, The Lord patiently interacts with us without ever compromising his core nature or objectives. God does not need us, but in his sovereignty, he chooses to include us. We matter to the process. God's ends are settled and unilateral, but his means to his ends are open for discussion.